Ready? So the last class, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
No, it's okay. It's okay. Leave it alone. It's okay. Come on, no, it's okay. Now he got offended. Come here, man.
So today,
Don't be shy.
as it says on the lesson plan, we're gonna talk a little about having everything together, and React Router and refs, but the order should be the other way around. Because yes, refs is still a concept of React. So first we're gonna talk about that, a little bit of why they exist and what we can use them for. Then we're gonna go to React Router, and React Router is a different library. I mean, it's a library you have to install in your project. And it helps you creating pages on your website, technically. And then we're gonna put everything together. I made an example, but I did not use database, otherwise I would have to spend a little bit more time on it. So I just created a small server and a client to fetch data from the server, and that's basically the example we're gonna be looking at all the time. So yeah, first let's start with the refs. What are refs? And refs are a short for references, basically, what it means. And it's one of those things you should not use a lot of references because they are expensive, and by expensive means makes your website slow. But a lot of times you need to do something somewhere else on your website that belongs to, if you know the term of the callback, it's basically the same thing. Let's say you give something to someone and then it can use exactly that object. Because until now, what we've been doing is that we give functions to children and then children can call those functions. But children do not necessarily touch the parent HTML schema at all. They can do some changes that it looks like. But with refs, technically you can do that. You can put a reference on a parent and then give to the children and say you can use this from now on. So basically you're sending a copy, and that's not the best term, but you're sending a copy of the parent to the children saying if you want you can use it. So that's also why it's expensive. But there is a lot of examples, and I had a bit of a hard time to figure out one, but I ended up figuring out one that it was a bit, I think it's easy to understand. And now you're gonna have to ignore how things look, because this is how it already has a router and all that stuff. So basically we're gonna be looking at the create part, and again, the create has a name and a description. I will just open the inspection tools here. Maybe zoom in a bit. So yeah, it has a name and a description, and this is very similar to what we had before. And on a submit, it tries to create a record on somewhere. So if we look here at this create, this is basically what we are looking at on a website. So we have a form, we have a p tag that tells insert data to create a new repository, and that's basically this one. Then we have this info, which is basically an info message that I'm saying if it's there, print it, if not, don't print it. And then we have a form. And now this form, I did it a bit different to what we had before, because before we were basically on week 4, we had the input name and input description, and then we handled them separately all the time. But in here, as you can see, the input for name still has on change set name. The same thing if I close this one, we can have them side by side, because we have a name set name state, description set description state. So they still have the same exact core functionality, as you can imagine. But the only thing that this is doing is basically allowing me to type here, and as you can see all the way down there, the value gets updated, and this is happening with state, not with HTML. And this is exactly the same thing we had before. The big difference is that I put everything around a form, and again, the form is really important. You put around everything because that's where the form is going to take place. And I have a input submit, which automatically creates a button that automatically creates a submit event on that button. We don't need to put any handler, anything on it. We just need to say its type submit. And that triggers a message on a form on submit. So now instead of having a function per each field and then handle his name, his description, blah, 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 then now I want to handle submit, which handles the entire form. And that's the function I have it here. Then, of course, you get an event, and I'm just saying prevent default so that it basically doesn't
do the table and come back.
it doesn't do a lot more than it should, basically. And in here, I'm doing a fetch with post, which basically I'm just posting something somewhere. To that URL there. And now, because I'm using state to manage the inputs, as you can see here, now the value of name and value of description, as you can see, even just for me selecting it, is the one that comes from state. So every time I'm changing something, when I say submit, it actually gets those values. I don't need to say form get elements, or I don't need to go that crazy because I have everything in state. So it's very, very easy to do that. Then of course, after you submit, you should always clean up your forms, which in this case you clean up your state. That basically affects the forms. Now, one thing that I did here for the references, and I don't know if you're seeing, but there is this use ref, which again is a React hook, like use state, like use context, like use effect, that basically by writing this use ref, and there is documentation there, as you can see, basically creates an instance, creates something. But if we just do this, then it just creates something. We are not using it for anything. So in here I'm saying use ref, and I call the text input. Now in any element where I want to use as a ref, there is this special prop, which is not a prop, and you can actually not use a prop named ref because of this, because this one is special. I'm saying like, oh, this input, which is the name one, I want this to be, I want the reference of this so that I can use somewhere. That's basically what I'm saying by doing this, by creating it here, by saying use ref, and then here I'm attaching it here. So I'm just saying like, I want to use this somewhere at some point. And I will console log it here so that we can actually see what we are looking at. Text input. I will console log it here, right? On create, I don't know. And this one, let's call it on submit. So as you can see here is undefined. It knows it's an input because we attached to it. Basically, that's what we did here. We said that this ref is that. Actually, if now we just remove it from here and let's put it on a div. When we refresh, now it's a div. And as you can see now, we are selecting the whole div. So basically this creates it does not create, but it references an element so that you can modify at any time, basically. Which, as you can imagine, that's why it's expensive. That's why people say, only use it if you really need to, basically. So my main idea to use it is, and now let's comment this out. Let me just see if I have things running. Yes, okay. So yeah, let's clean this stuff. So now I hit submit. It created and it showed the new repository called new repository was added, and it cleaned the fields. But now I start typing and I'm nowhere. I need to select this again, right? Okay. So sometimes you might want to like, oh, after submit, go back to put the cursor back there. So for instance, when, most of the times on search, that's very important because you hit search, click enter, and then you're looking like, oh, this is not the results. Then it would be nice to keep typing and you're still on search. So for that, You could think of other solutions, definitely. You could say like, oh, but we could find the element, we are in the same page, we could have a state or something. Yes, we could do a lot of different things, but for that, there is this reference. So what I can do right here, actually, as you can see here, because in here was on create, now on submit, and yeah, this contains basically all the HTML information that an element can have. So now in here, I'm saying text input dot current dot focus, which means that after the submission, all this ran. We set the state, we set another state, we set another state, we log, and then we focus on input again. So, for instance, just to have a clean, cool stuff. Did it? Oh, why did I clean? Okay. Let's try again. This is new. So now the cursor went back to the name. And as you can see, now if I start typing, I'm back there. So this is a very good use case to use a ref to to be able to reference another thing. But again, if in here we want to put values and function, that's when it becomes dangerous. It should not be for very heavy things. It should be for simple things, so that it's not. Otherwise, your application is going to get very, very slow.
And this current focus is automatically, right?
This is HTML. I mean, this is basic JavaScript. It's a way to get the focus on JavaScript. So only this part basically is React, because this text input gives you everything that an HTML element can have. As you can see, it's a lot. So basically, you can do anything. Whatever you can do in JavaScript, you can do anything with it now. You can you can change the value of it. You can basically do anything. For instance, one case that it's common, but that's probably a more elaborate one, is whenever you open a model that opens like a small pop-up on your window, and then you close. Usually you want to go back to the exact same place where you were before, and not on the top of the page, not on the bottom of the page, not. So this is where the ref sometimes is used to, because a pop-up basically it's nowhere on the website, because it's like the website is here and then a pop-up is here.
Yeah,
so then you need to know where to go back. So if you create a reference and then you say like, oh, this button where you actually click to see the pop-up, this is the reference. So whenever you close, it goes back to that reference. That's one of the, I would say, most used cases. But things like this, to after a form submission, go back to the input or go to the search or something like that. This is also a very, very good use case.
I don't think people use pop-ups anymore.
Not pop-ups, but models, which is the same thing. Pop-ups is basically a new window. Model is a div on your website, which is almost the same.
We have that.
No, in here they don't have any.
I remember.
No. Because, for instance, you can see that this usually, this is basically a model that is happening because it's on top of the website. It's in a different background.
Layer.
Yeah. So, I mean, in this case, probably you don't want to go back there because, yeah, you don't want to. I mean, this is a documentation thing. But depending on your website, depending on the features, sometimes you want, like, after doing this, then you need to go back there. So this would be the best case scenario to use a ref, so that you can very easily, like 3 lines of code, as you can see here, puts you can manage any other element. Now, of course, you can always do something like this. And now this one, we can put it on the description. And again, you cannot use the same ref for 2 different things, otherwise well, it's no longer a reference, right? The same thing cannot have 2 different values. So now here we can say this. Don't we have something already called description? Yes. I don't know if we have value, but let's try it.
Yeah, it's not good.
But probably you need the current as well. Current, probably. So now if we do this, did it work? Probably the server is down again. Yes. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Yes, now we are there. Okay. So now if we do this, as you can see, it's selecting on the first one, and the other one got the value this, because we are doing that. So again, a reference for this one would be a bit stupid because we already have the description as a state, but it's another way. Again, it's an expensive way. You should not do it, but it's possible to do.
Does it also work when you reload the page? Like, for example, you are already reading at the middle part of the page, and when you reload, instead of
Going all the way to the top.
going back on the top, you will stay in the same.
Yeah, but in this case, then the reference needs to go with the user, and that becomes a bit more complicated.
So it's a different.
Yeah,
part.
that should be handled in a different way. Again, the reference is so that other functions can manage. It's okay, open. So that other functions can manage HTML elements, basically. Because it's not even other components. Technically, you can send a whole component as a reference, and we do that eventually. Like, because if your requirements ask for it, that's the only way to solve this problem. You have to do it. But you can do that as well.
A whole component as a reference.
Yeah, because for instance, if you put the reference here in the beginning, you have access to the entire thing. So basically, you can manage anything on that component somewhere else. Like in JavaScript, whenever you would create elements, you could access the child of the element and the parent of the element or whatever. So once you have a reference here, for instance, here we can say current.parent.something, and then it goes to the label, then it goes to the form. Like, it becomes basic HTML JavaScript. So all that can be managed like that. But again, it's not advised, of course. It should be for the basic purpose. But again, you could always say, but then what's the difference between a prop, a ref, and a state, and all those things, right? Because, I mean, the ref can be not understood, but misunderstood as state, because you can say like, oh, but I could use it. You can use the ref to keep values, right? Because if you have an input field, you can always change the value of it whenever you want. But you should not do that, because state is something really fast to update, and it's something that you should use if you want to change something on your web page, some values, some everything. Refs should only be to manipulate HTML, basically. I'm pretty sure that's, yeah.
They always say
basically,
that.
avoid using refs. Yeah, again, this triggering imperative animations, which basically it's the model thing that something opens or whatever, managing focus, text selections. This is exactly the example we saw, so that it focused now on this field. Or, I mean, you can even say, like, for instance, if you have multiple forms, right, and you have one, you submit, and then you want to jump to the next form. This is also something that you can use a ref to, or something like that. And then, of course, integrated with third parties, which is like something that it's not React, or something that it's not your thing. You can always use references for it as well. Then, of course, this is, I think, the most important one. Do not overuse them, because, again, it is an expensive thing. Most of the examples that you'll see on the React one, of course, is still the old way to do it, but it's not that different, because basically, right now you write use ref, and that creates a reference. Back in the days, you'd have to have a variable or constant, and then say react.createRef, and then you can just use it as normal. And And the way to access is always the same, is .current, which basically means give me the thing. So and I think in terms of references, that's basically it. It's something that exists. If sometimes you might, again, sometimes it's hard to know what's the question to use the ref for.
Yeah,
And sometimes you might see a problem, like, and you have no idea how to solve it. Like, can I solve it with this? Can I solve it with that? And sometimes, like, try it, because if you can solve it with ref, might not be the best case scenario, but try it anyway.
It's like, do you like when you like when you're at work, when you work, where you guys work and stuff like that, do you still have like that kind of like scenario where you have a problem that you guys don't know how to solve it?
Usually you end up it's not that you do not know how to solve it, it's that you solve it. And then eventually people are like, oh, maybe it should be done another way. And then you solve it another way. It's like, at least we don't get any more to the state of like, oh, I have no idea how to solve this. Because also before I get to that point, you have a team to talk to.
Yeah.
So you never end up getting there alone, usually. But what happens a lot of times is that you do something, and then you do something else, and then if someone because most of the times when you're working, you are a bit focused on what you have to solve, and you don't worry with everything else, basically.
Yeah.
But someone else can actually say like, oh, this should be done this way, because then we can reuse it, or we can do something different somewhere else, but yeah, again, sometimes like you do something and people are like, oh, maybe you should have used state instead, because you can solve it with state and it's way faster and cheaper for the application to run. So most of the times that's what happens. But yeah, and that was basically references, and yeah, that was basically it. Now we should jump into routes.
Wow, that fast?
Yeah. Maybe before we go to routes.
I have a question before
yes.
we start.
Yes.
Is it similar to Node or completely different?
You can say similar but different. I mean, it again, you need to be able, because in Node, you create the routes and other people call it, right?
Yeah.
Because you are the server and you don't care about the client. In here, you need to create both. You need to basically say like, oh, if I go here, I need to show this. If I go there, I need to show that.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's a bit more, I mean, it's more visual, at least, than Node,
I like that.
for sure. It needs more code than Node, because
I don't like that.
in Express, you basically just say app.use / and then it happens there.
Yeah.
In here, it has to be a little bit different.
I don't mind a lot of code as long as it works.
Yeah.
I have a lot of code, it doesn't run.
Because, but before we talk about routes, last week we talked about render props, and I gave you the example of the counter thing, but then I decided, because for this example I needed to call the same API a lot of times, one to fetch a lot, one to fetch one only. So, and as I told you last time, you can do that. You can do a fetch as a render prop, that then you get the data and the error and the loading and blah blah. And I'm going to show what's happening before you think it's magic. So basically I created the fetcher component. And in here I have a URL, and this URL is my server where the data is. Right now we don't care about that. And I have 3 states. I have a loading, a data, and an error. And they mean exactly that. One means that it's loading. That's why it always starts at true, because it's always, probably when you go to it the first time, it's always loading. Then we have a data, which basically it's the data that we want to give. And then we have an error, which means that is there something wrong, the website is down, whatever, it's an error. Then inside of it, I have a use effect. And the use effect, I don't know if it's very complicated to understand, but basically has a function called getData, which is an async function, because it calls fetch, and fetch returns promise. So in here I'm saying fetch to this base URL. And basically what I'm saying is that if I'm passing an ID as prop to this component, then I want the URL to be /repo ID equals whatever ID I'm setting. If I'm not passing any ID, then I want all the repos, which means I want /repos. And I will explain what's happening on the other side. And then whatever happens there, I want the response of it as JSON. Then down here, because I have other types of errors, then I'm just checking like if there was any error, then set loading to false because it's no longer loading, and set error to whatever result is there. If there is no error, means that everything went as planned. So set loading to false again because we have the data, and set the data to whatever result.data that comes from there. So this is no new. The thing is, if you want to use this same logic across multiple components, then you need to copy paste this use effect. You need to copy paste this entire block to every one of them because, I mean, you want to do this here, you want to do this there. But we don't want to do that. So basically, because I have this render function here, I'm just saying render loading data and error back. So whoever wants to use this component, you open the component, you start writing the component, and then you get error, loading, and data as results of it. Now, how does that look like? No, repositories, yeah. Okay, so this repositories here, I will show on the website. Which one is it? Probably this one. The server went down again. But this repositories it's basically the same, the old repositories that we had before. Just like I cleaned it up a lot. I removed all the delete and whatever because I didn't want that to occupy space for now. And as you can see, it looks like this. It only has the start button, the title, and the description. So in here, this repository is still the same, I think, whatever happens down there. But in here, I'm calling this fetcher as a component. And then I have this render that, and in here, there's a lot of brackets, parentheses, brackets. But basically, this gives me a function. This is a function, right? Whenever you have the parentheses. With these three items, data, error, and loading. And now inside, I can use those three items however I want. And this data, for instance, I can console log loading data and error. So as you can see there, loading is the first one. So is loading, there is no data, there is no error. Is not loading, there is still no data and no error, but then there is data. And that's basically what we want. So my data object here, and as you can see here, there is no fetching API, no nothing. I'm just basically calling this fetcher that does all this for me already. So if I now want to make a new list of repositories somewhere else, I just need to do exactly this amount of code. And I don't need to fetch again and resolve the promise and do all that that type of logic.
That render that you have there is
this is a prop.
Is that the prop that comes from the fetcher?
Yes. Yeah, it's this prop. Then send back here.
Oh, because you return.
Yeah. Yeah, because we are returning it again.
Okay.
Okay,
So this is a
so it's almost a function inside of a function inside of a function.
So this is a prop, but this is actually what you're returning here. Is
Yeah.
a function, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm returning the same prop, but now with stuff on it as a function.
As a function. So you're returning as a function.
I thought they are all objects.
Well, that's
No.
what
I
got me
didn't see the
confused.
parentheses.
That's what got me totally
No,
confused.
the
Yeah, there-
loading data and error are objects
Yeah.
that can possibly
But
be
the
null.
render is a function.
Yes.
Mhm.
And that's why in here we get it. I mean, this would be something
Yeah.
function.
A function with
That,
parameter
that's,
object.
that's what screwed me up.
That
I mean,
That's
one
similar.
of them.
it would be similar to have it like that
Right.
because it returns a function.
Yeah.
But that's also why sometimes, I mean, for the first time you're doing React, or this does not only exist in React, it exists in other places. Whenever people see this, people might think, what the hell is going on? What's happening here? How come I get the data? Like, I'm not doing anything. But yeah, this is probably one of the most used cases of render props would be for something like this. Because right now we have a place where we fetch all our data, and if we want to change something, let's say our routes on our server changes, we don't need to find everywhere where we use the fetch. No, we go here. There is one place to change the URL, basically, because all the logic is being handling on this place.
So you can use this almost like microservices in Node. Like you can create another fetcher, another component like this to fetch another URL,
Yeah.
and display different things on the website coming from different places.
Yeah. Or you can even have the URL as a parameter of it, and then it handles everything, basically.
Add another URL as a parameter?
No, have the URL as a parameter, and then it's completely independent of the service that it's running.
What do you mean?
Right now, you can only run here,
Yeah.
right? Because it's hard-coded here.
Yeah.
But imagine that I want to actually query the ones from GitHub. Then I need to change this one to GitHub, and all of them changes to that.
Yeah.
So what I then do is that I add a new parameter here,
Yeah.
So
saying,
you can create an object with links.
no, just saying URL here, and then here, I mean, now this won't work, but URL, and now here, I send the URL as normal. And I can send any URL here, and now all the logic will still happen. Of course, that if the data does not come as a data object and it comes as a results object or something, that needs to be handled here. But right now, this is completely independent of whatever service it is. We are sending the URL as a parameter, so it will fetch, resolve, and respond with the data. And then this data object will contain something eventually. So we can have it, because again, when I say parameters, we are looking at the component, so it's props. So it's a function, so we can basically add anything to it. And as you can see, I already have an ID and search here. So we already have more stuff we can do with this, because right now it loads like a lot of repositories, always, right? But we might also want only one repository. And it already has support for that. And that's basically what, if we send an ID, then instead of being /repos, it's /repo, which means result only one returns back.
Okay. But on the fetcher on the repositories, you did not yet pass an argument ID and search, right?
Not here, no.
No.
But
Somewhere.
here I did. So in here, can I move this side by side? Is it here? Yeah, exactly.
So it's not really required?
No.
Optional, yeah.
No, and that's why in here I'm saying, like, if it's there, that does this. In any other case, does that. But for instance, right now we have a repositories and a repo side by side, which means one is a lot of items and another one is only one item. And as you can see, it's the same exact component, the fetcher, and it returns the same exact render with loading or error. The only difference is then on this one, I'm passing an ID and I'm giving an ID. And then of course, because if there is data, I know it's only one, then I'm not mapping, right? Otherwise that would give me an error. Because in here, I know it's a lot of data because I'm not filtering by ID, so I have to map through the data. So as you can see, the same code is being used in two very different ways. And if something needs to be updated on API, it only has to be updated here on a fetcher and not in every component that uses the fetch, basically.
From where do you get the ID there?
Yeah, that's part of the routes. But there is an ID. And if there isn't any, that's something I'll show as well. So before we go to the routes, so that we also understand this fetcher and whatever is happening here, basically I created Express server here. And as you can see here, so there is a slash, which is an info, slash repos, and slash search. And then there is a post to repo, which basically is to create, right? And that's why I'm handling this one a bit different, because I had some problems with it, basically. And if we go, for instance, the info gets this info, which is basically just something saying like, yeah, it's because, again, I'm using Code Sandbox, and Code Sandbox goes down. If you have a server, it goes down every 20 minutes. That's why sometimes it does not work. And that's why also I have an info, so I can open it from time to time just to keep it running. So for instance, it creates this URL, and if I say info, no, it cannot get the info. Why it cannot get the info? Are we there? No, it's not the info, it's actually the root. Yeah. So if we do this, it returns that, yeah, if you want the repositories, go to slash repos. Again, the slash repos, as I said, I did not create a database. The database is this. It's an hard-coded object here with all my repos. So basically the slash repos is just returning all of them because, yeah, I'm not doing any logic for this. This is not magic. If I do this, returns all of them. If I do repo and ID, then it filters by ID, right?
Yes.
Free, whatever ID is there. I think even if, yeah, it actually asks you, there returns an error, and it asks you to provide an ID for it. If there is something that does not exist, it says that it does not exist, and all the logic is here, basically just doing some stuff.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You download here something to make the server on the sandbox?
I just created a Node API on the Sandbox.
Okay.
Because you can create any JavaScript type of service. And
Is this on Node or a React router?
no, this is Node only. This is only Express. There's nothing else here, basically. And this was just so that I would have some data to actually work with, because again, to the GitHub API, I cannot really change stuff, and I wanted to be able to create new repositories.
What I meant is just like, because how we learn the node, like you should download the node and then you work so you can have server.
Yes.
You did that just in Sandbox. You just write the
Yes.
code directly.
Yes.
You
And
just choose Node instead of React.
Yeah. Whenever you want to create a new sandbox, you can choose what you want to create it with.
Yes, yeah, I just noticed that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's basically it. Again, instead of downloading everything, I just did it here so that it's there. I don't
Yeah.
care. And as you can see, now it went down again. Because again, it's a free service, right? You cannot have it up forever. That
You
would
cannot
be insane.
complain.
No,
I
that would
think
be
it
insane.
is even better than CodePen.
CodePen, yes, it's
Yeah,
way,
it's
way
even
better than
better.
CodePen. Yes. So yeah, this is the server part. But again, we are only looking at the server because we want to use it, and nothing else. And the only thing that matters is because I made everything that I return has the data keyword on it. That's why on a fetcher, I'm saying result.data, because I know it's there. Because if you don't know if you're working with some other API, then you should always check, is it this there? And if not, then it's an error. If so, like there is a lot of ifs and elses you have to do. That's another thing, to have all the logic here, because then
Okay.
you don't have all that logic in every single component, and then someone updates the API, and then you have to go and update everywhere. Are we using this here? So with this example, you can easily create now a fetcher that fetches everything. Of course, to create results, you need a post, and that's a little bit different. And that one is not here. The logic is not here. But yes, that's how we are getting the data. And on the website, as you can see here, I'm getting all the repositories, and in here I'm getting one repository, because I'm filtering up there. And now this is React, right? Because we are running React here. This is our regular code. If we go here, there is a lot of stuff. Yeah. And as you can see, now we are no longer on a slash. We are slash something, and that's what React Router is, and that's where we're gonna talk a lot about today. So this was basically all the introduction. Okay, so server is running. We don't care what's running. We just care it is running. And data is being fetched like this. Again, the idea here, it might be a bit confusing, is just that if I'm sending an ID, it means I want one record only. If I'm not sending an ID, I want all of them. That's basically what this if does.
Mm-hmm.
So that's handled. So now, React Router. So in order to use it, I had to install a package called React Router DOM. And I mean, you have to run npm install or add or whatever it is, React Router DOM, and then you just have it. Now, the way that it works, it is a little bit tricky. And as you can see, I made a lot of changes on my code to make it as simple as possible. And I'm not sure if I achieved that. So when we look at our index, which it's still our main entrance point on the website, right? As we had before, the same thing. We had the language provider, theme provider, and then a Git home, which basically that one has all the logic to get the component, all the subcomponents and everything. So in here, nothing changed on the index. Still is the same. But now our Git home changed quite a lot, because in here we no longer have all the repositories and the header and the footer and whatnot. Now what we have here, and starting from top, and from top from here, because the imports, we will look at them after, we have a wrapper, and this, I mean, if you try to figure out where it is something I created. And when we look at it, is just this wrapper. Let me close this one. Basically, this wrapper, it's to wrap the entire website with styles. That's basically what I did here. So I put all the styles there, and then I put the header as well, so that I don't need to have the header in every single component where I want, right? Because now that might be a bit hard for you to understand, but every time I navigate here, I want to keep this top bar always there, right? So it does not make sense to include that everywhere. What makes sense is to create a wrapper, or you can call it whatever you want. It's just that this word, I use it a lot. And then we learn this, we create that, and we print out all the children. Mm-hmm. So this is like how children in React are really used, is to create wrappers of stuff. And that's basically one of the homeworks you had to do, is like, a wrapper only for the style. And that was really dumb to do because we have classes for that. But if you want to share a component, that's the best case scenario. So for instance, now the header is everywhere the same. Now, by everywhere, what do I mean by that? Because now I have a wrapper here, and
just one quick question before
yes,
it gets more complicated. Because that what he did here on the wrapper, it reminds me of WordPress PHP, where they put the header on a single, include the header everywhere, so you can also include the footer here.
Yes, we can include anything here. I mean, I removed the footer because it was taking a lot of space from what I wanted to do. But
so when the wrapper loads, the header and the footer are on the page, and all the changes is the body.
But in here, that's not what we want. In here, we want to reuse code, basically. That's the only reason we are doing that, is so that we can reuse code. Because including them here or there does not make a difference. You can include it in every page.
No, that's what I'm saying. It's like, you include the header and the footer, and then, because if they have to be on every page.
Yeah.
And then all you change is the body, like, for the routing.
Yes. Yeah, because for instance, now I wrote in the footer here, we could have it as well. And as you can see, all the content comes in between. The footer is still there. Mm-hmm. So again, this is one of the ways to use React Children, is to actually pass them so that then you can share stuff. But again, sometimes when you look at this site here, might look a little bit weird because you do not really understand what is what. There is not a single HTML tag in here, right? When we do this, there is no HTML in here now. Everything is a component. And that's where things can be a bit tricky of what's the best case scenario. Is it to actually understand what's on the code or not? But yeah, I created this wrapper that basically everything goes inside. Now, when we look at the imports here, I'm importing from this React router DOM, and I'm importing as browse router as router, and this one actually, this is just because I copy pasted, because we can actually use browse router so that we don't have, we are using the native names of what they call them. Then we have a switch, then we have route, and then we have link. And basically we need all of this to create routes. That's why I'm saying it's way different than in Node, because in Node you only need server.use and then a route. That's it. So the reason why we need this is so that React knows where is what basically, and how do we get there as well. So the link, as it says, is a link. You're no longer going to use A tags to link inside of a website. That's not used anymore now. Not with React. You would use a link tag. And the link does not have the href, like the A tag, because if you would write a regular A tag, you would say something like go here, and then this would be href, go here, right? Here. So before we would do this, but the problem is that the React router would basically, it would be impossible to figure out all your A tags, because sometimes your A tags might also be external. You might want to have a link to your profile,
okay.
to your Facebook or something. The link is only to navigate on your page that you're building. So basically you need to create a link, and then you need to create a route for that link. So in here I have a link for slash, and you always have to have a link for slash, because that means it's the nothing, the route, and I call it home. And then in here I need a route for path slash as well. And inside of this route, I'm sending a component called home. I can send anything, because again, this is React components, so we can have a div. In here I just divided them all into different components. That's why it might look a little bit weird. Now this link here, when we look on a code, is an A tag. As you can see, we didn't do magic. And as you can see, the other one we wrote as A tag is the same. They are all the same. There is no problem on using this link. This is just so that we tell the router we are using an internal route. And that also makes your web page a little bit faster, because the router knows exactly how many pages you have, knows exactly where they are, knows exactly what are the components to render. So pages becomes faster, basically. So let's kill this one here. Now, as you can see, here we are on this one, or this is the same. If you just put the slash, usually it takes it off because it doesn't really need it. And it has, this is home, which is what we wrote here. So in here, we can have as many components as we want, or elements, or anything, because it's just basic React. But that's why I created the home component that has that thing on it. Now, I created a folder called pages, because for me it makes sense in my mind. Again, it's not it's not a requirement that if it's a page, it has to be on a folder called pages. It's not a requirement. Just for me, it makes a bit sense to have a folder called components and a folder called pages. But of course, whatever is inside of the pages is a component, is a React, because we are doing React, we are not doing anything else. So this is a component. It's just that I know that this component called home is used as a page. So if I want to reuse this, I should be careful with it, because it comes from a pages folder. But again, this is a personal opinion. It's not a requirement. It's not nothing.
If you want to use this, you should be careful. For why?
Because, for instance, this one only has this thing. But when you look here, in here we're going to load a huge amount of
Okay. Yeah, depending
components.
on what's on the component.
Yes.
That's why you have to be careful.
So if I now, like here, I want like, oh, I'm going to use a component called repos because it sounds cool.
Yeah.
But then it's going to have all that
okay.
stuff.
Yes,
So,
yeah, I see.
and that's why I divide them, because then I know what's their responsibilities.
Yeah.
Because again, in this example, we already have it. We have a component called repositories, and we have a page called repos.
Yeah, the name could be
So-
tricky. Yeah.
So the names can start to become a bit tricky, like because you're gonna have to. You don't have to divide the logic, but you should divide the logic between those. So still looking at the home page. Again, this is a regular component. In here, we are not doing anything magic. Now, the reason, and this might look a bit weird for you, but the reason why, for instance, down here I have home repositories and then create, and then up here I have create, repos, and then home. The reason is that the slash is just a fallback, so it should be at the end.
Okay.
If it's at the beginning, then you might not be able to. I mean, I don't know if we're gonna get that error, but it's a very common error of people not being able to handle. Yeah, exactly. Now all of them, even though we have slash create, but because basically it's matching the cases, and it says like, oh, is it slash? Yeah, then it's this one, and it doesn't look further. I believe that on Express is the same thing. When I build the node server, I believe it's the same thing. If you have the slash right at the beginning, then it ignores all the rest because everything is slash.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Everything is slash. So again, that's why if you have, that one should always be at the bottom, always. Because now basically what it's going to say, like, is it slash create? No. Slash repos? No. Slash repo ID? No. Then, well, there's only one left. So that's why again, in here it makes sense to be on this order because that's the order it's going to appear on the website visually. So this sometimes might be a bit confusing. And then of course the switch, we didn't mention it but we are still importing it here. But the switch, you can imagine, I mean, it's the same exact word of a switch case. And you can imagine that it does the same. When you look here, it just has a lot of HTML stuff on it. But when you look, there is a switch case, and then there is a case create, if so, create, case repos, if so. So it's no different. I mean, behind the scenes, it's a little bit not, but again, not that different. There is a switch case behind the scenes.
Conceptually, it's the same. Yeah.
And I don't know, but I'm guessing that's also the names that they gave to it so that it makes more sense on a programmer brain because everybody knows what a switch case is. So if you have your routes, they should be inside of a switch so that, yeah.
Switch would be better than just take a look.
No, no, because I mean, technically, when you think about, we are already wrapping everything in a browser router. So technically, we don't need the switch here. They could handle it. The library could handle the whole thing for us. This is also just so that we know exactly, like, this is where I need to have all my logic. Because, for instance, if we move this one out for some reason, this probably it's gonna get some errors. Which one? Yeah, now it got all of them. It got the home and it got itself, because it's no longer comparing things. It's no longer saying like, if it's this one does this, if it's that one does that. So it actually got the one from create and the one from home, because yeah, it's not a switch anymore. So always put them inside of a switch. And of course this navigation here is just this. I mean, this,
The options, yeah.
technically we can have it here. We don't need this actually.
What about browser router?
This is basically the wrapper that the routes needs to run, and that's also why like all of them are being imported from the same library, because we need all of them in order to have pages, in order to route And from what I know, before I say something wrong, yeah, exactly. So I moved the links outside of the browser router, right? Because now the browser router only starts here, and then of course I got an error and says like, nope, you should not do this. You have to use the links inside of the router. So then, of course, the way that you structure your components, like we did the same thing we did with what was it? With the providers, that we put them all the way up so that we don't need to see them like on the components we're making logic. It makes sense to do something similar with the routers because it's not something you change often. It's not something that you're constantly changing. You're just changing sometimes. And again, you might forget that sometimes you might put the links outside of it, because that's also why you should always put it as a wrapper so that all the children have this. So technically, this browser router, we could have put it in our wrapper as well. We could have done that completely. Because when you look at now our Git home component is basically logic for routers, and then components, these components, I will maybe write some comments here.
How about the navigation? Could also be in the wrapper or no?
Yes, if we would move the browser router there, then the navigation could also be there. But again, and that was the reason why I added as a component itself, because usually it also makes sense the navigation to be its own thing because you want its own style and things like that. But again, a page like this only has 3 routes, 3 navigation items. It's small enough, like we can see it in one page. We can read the whole component here. So now in here, I'm just going to write some comments so it's not that crazy complicated. Because these are the components that now we're going to look at. So we saw the home one, right? Which, again, when you look at it, there is these pages components here that basically they represent pages. And we saw the home. When, for instance, we look at create one, the create looks like this. We already looked at it actually when we were talking about the the reference. That was exactly where we were looking at. We were looking at this page here, and this was the component. So as you can see, like there is no magic behind it. It's a React component as we know it. It's just being used as, when we go to /create, I want this specific component there. Of course, everything is being wrapped on this one. So yeah, that's some, and this still works as it did before, all the themes and languages, because everything is being wrapped on a parent. So we don't need to care about like are things working or not. We can assume they are. So the create one is very straightforward. We saw how it works. Again, this one is the one that has a post because it posts to that server that we just saw with the names. And it's, if you don't know, but probably should, I think, from Node, the post is also something very easy to do. It's this amount of lines of code. So, and it handles the same way. I always think it's bad that they created a thing called fetch, but then you can post to it, which is, it's not the same meaning, because fetch means bring it, post means send it. But yeah, the name is fetch.
That's a
Verb.
no. You said they created like the
JavaScript community.
Oh.
Because fetch is part of JavaScript.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a special package for it or anything.
Yeah.
I mean, again, if you use, probably heard of Axios or whatever, I don't know. There is other packages that people use, but usually I always use fetch because I don't need fancy stuff.
Yeah, fetch is kind of promise.
Yeah.
But they use Axios many times. I have seen a lot of tutorials.
Yeah.
So-
Axios is very, very used
Yeah.
because, but Axios is its own library. You have to import.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why people use it is that it has more debugging thing. It becomes a bit more easy in a big project. But for small examples, and even for big examples, I've used fetched all the time because I don't want to install new packages. I mean,
It's complicated.
if I don't need the feature, like, can I use all my requirements can be solved with fetch? then I don't want a new package, because a package brings more memory, brings more stuff. So, and again, that's my personal opinion, but there are some developers that they like packages. The more, the better. I don't.
They want to have
Yes.
their package the JSON to be so
Exactly.
long, thousands of lines.
It
Yeah.
sounds like my code. I have like 20 packages just to declare let A equals 1.
But that's the thing. If you don't need special features, fetch does the work usually. Okay, now when we looked at the create one, now let's look at the repos. And the repos, it's this one that we're looking at. The server went down again, right? Or the internet went down. One of them went down. One of them probably. But as you can see, the loading works.
Yeah.
At least you know.
The bright side.
That's the good part.
The code is working.
Yeah.
So the repos page, again, as you can see, I could have done all this here instead of creating this one. I just wanted to separate them to have like everything represented here as well. So in here, basically, it has a headline, and then it loads the repositories component, which is located on our components one, which again, we already saw it. Same thing, works as the same way. Are we there? Almost. Yeah, okay. So now it's fast. But yeah, as you can see, this from here on, actually, if we use the components one from React, now it's more interesting to see that we have providers, we have routers, we have all that stuff. So as you can see, now it grows a lot. And as you can see, we have our router here, one of our router, and then we have repos, and then we have repositories, and this is already the component we did actually when we started this, basically. Then in here we have the fetcher that we saw, blah, 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 all that stuff. So this one does not have anything new, anything fancy. It's just a very small component here. Now the only difference on all of them here, of course, is this one, because it's the fallback. It's the one that it's the last one to have, and then is this one, and this one has /repo /column ID, and this basically it creates a variable. So this matches exactly this path, and this one says whenever it's /repo, whatever is after it, make it as an ID, basically. I could call it name, I could call it whatever I want. This doesn't have to be ID, it's just a parameter, basically. And there you can send multiple parameters through the URL. Like, so in here, now I'm just sending an ID. Now what looks a bit weird is because in here I'm sending an ID, but then I'm not using it anywhere. And that's sometimes what might be a bit frustrating, is that in a development perspective, is that every time you have a variable, then you need to pass it as a parameter or as a prop or as a whatever. And in here, we do not have to do that. So this repo component here, we also seen it already, and that's where I said to ignore this. Now, do not ignore this anymore, because our React router also has a hook called use params that basically says like all the parameters that probably are, I'll put them side by side here, whatever parameters that probably are being sent here, now I want them here as this value. And as I said, like we could have called it name here, right? But then we have to call this one name because they have to match, basically. So
no, so below the fetcher, you would have to go be also.
yeah, and this one also name. But again, this one is already the fetcher. But in order to actually have data here that comes from the URL, it's the one here and the one on the use params that we need to change. So for instance, now here, if we console log ID, whenever we now do this, No. Oh, actually, it's just slash. Yeah. I was mistaken. These ones. So, for instance, if we just actually send whatever goes there, we are console logging it there. I mean, there is an error because we do not have a resource with that ID, but that's a different thing. But again, in here we can console log, we can access any parameter that comes. Which, when you think about and you look at all these routes here, you need to be careful with the routes you have because some of them might override others. Because imagine that for some reason, I mean, I'm just going to write it here, but we wanted this, actually, yeah, to the create one. Imagine that we wanted this repo/new. Right now, it would actually still work because this is the first one to kick in on a switch case. But if we would have this here after, and now we would say new, it does not go to that page because it thinks that this is a parameter. Because when you look here, repo/new fits this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
It fits. It's what we are saying, whatever variable. So it fits that one exactly. So it does not go to the next one. So, and this is something you need to take care of because nobody can do it for you. There is no way to test it. There is no way to check it. It's just that you need to be aware that if we want a repo/new and we want a repo/anything, then they need to be in the right order. Because now, if we do this, repo/new, now we are on a create. And if we do repo/one, now it does not fit this anymore. Then it goes to the next one until it finds. And if it doesn't fit anything, then it just goes to the last one. So again, this is it's something. I mean, it's not extremely dangerous. It's just that there is no way to debug it. There is no way for you, like you don't get an error. You don't get, like everything works because technically the code is telling you like, hey, you told me to do this, so I'm doing right.
You can just see that there's no colon on the first one and just consider
Yeah.
parameters after.
Yeah, but again, for instance, in here we have a lot of, I mean, not a lot, a very small amount of routes.
Yeah.
But you can imagine in a very big, large website, this is insane to take care of.
I think the worst bug to catch is the one that's
Silent.
typos, right? Isn't it? That's the worst one, isn't it? Like when
Yeah,
you-
but
when you
for
have
instance-
like a variable that's typed or somewhere.
But in here it wouldn't even be a typo. This is actually logic. It just says like, yes, I know what you mean by repo/new. You told me to know what this is. So, but now we'll change to create. And when we look at our repo there on that side, again, in here we get an ID, and then we call our fetcher with that ID, and we know we get a repository. Again, the loading, as you can see, it's really, really fast, but it's still there. And the error, actually, we just saw. If you send something that does not exist,
You got an
we get an error, which basically we can handle it here. We can even say repository with ID. ID? Oh, we don't need this, right? Does not exist. Yeah. So we can write anything because we can handle it. We know what was the purpose here. Okay. I think maybe now, because one thing, I don't know if you noticed, but each and every one of them now here is a link as well.
That would be a route as well.
So we need to be able, and these ones we do not write them ourselves. So we need to be able to write these routes with the program, by programming. And that's what's missing for us to look at. So, but I think we should make a break now a little bit.